Storytelling 101, evolving meaning one relationship at a time. Typically, we build models to promote understanding, and sometimes we work at it for hours or days or weeks. And we actually learn a lot while we create the model, though in the process we become so enamored with it that we just have to share it with other people. And though what we typically provide them looks like this, where there is little hope of actually completely understanding what the developers understood, because it's just there are no comments in it. It's not sequenced, so there's an understanding of how to go about reading the structure, and it's sort of overwhelming, and it sort of turns people off. Though there is actually a better way to create the relationship model and actually convey meaning with it when you're finished. We create, as I said, we create models to promote understanding, and we begin with a situation that we want to understand, not a system. The reason that we start with the situation is because it helps us provide focus to understand what's relevant and what's not. The difficulty with the system is it's difficult to know where the boundaries is because everything's connected, so that if you set out to develop a relationship model for a system, it typically becomes an ungodly mess that in time even the developers won't understand. Once we begin with the situation, we ask two questions repeatedly. What does this influence and how? And what influences it and how? And we synthesize the relationship model piece by piece. So here, unwanted pregnancy typically promotes unwanted births. And if unwanted pregnancy increases, unwanted births increases, so this is adds to or same relationship. Look at the legend down here. So I ask myself, does this add to or subtract from this? And if this is not a stock, then I ask myself, if this increases, does this increase or decrease? And by simply asking those two questions, I understand whether I should make this an adds to same or subtracts from opposite relationship. And then I continue to ask the same questions over and over again. In other words, in terms of unwanted births, it typically promotes financial insecurity, and the same type of relationship in that unwanted births promotes more and more financial insecurity, and financial insecurity typically promotes unwanted pregnancies. What we continue to look for as we synthesize a relationship model is loops, because we've come to understand that loops typically have more influence over the behavior of a set of relationships than direct influences. And we continue to do this so that unwanted pregnancy tends to promote abortion, and abortion tends to reduce unwanted births, which then diminishes financial insecurity. And the difficulty with labeling the relationships themselves as to whether this increases this or decreases this is because individual connections end up being part of multiple loops. And one loop will drive the connection in one direction, and one loop will drive the connection in a different direction. But we figure out what these are, whether they're reinforcing or balancing structures, based upon walking the loop and counting the number of red relationships in the loop. If there are 0 or an even number, it's a reinforcing structure. If it's an odd number, then it's a balancing structure. And we label the loops based upon the sequence that we develop them in, though the sequence we develop them in is often not the right sequence that we want to tell a story in. But we simply continue to evolve the relationships based upon asking the same two questions over and over again, and we sequence the loops. And the whole intent of developing a model is to promote understanding. So don't believe you can ever get it right the first time. I never have, and I probably never will in the future. The idea is it's trial and learning. We build the model to help us better understand the relationships that are responsible for the situation being the way it is, so that we can figure out how to deal with it in a meaningful fashion, as opposed to simply meddling in the situation, which is what we typically do most of the time anyway. And so I sequence the loops in the order that I build them, knowing full well that I'm probably going to alter the order of the loops, because later on I want to go ahead and tell a story in a meaningful fashion. It's also appropriate to document the loops, and you can do that very well in Kumu because the loops can have definitions to them. In Kumu, you could also document individual elements or connections if you needed to add clarity. So that it's just real easy to make the relationship model that you develop meaningful. But you continue to add these until you develop what you consider are all of the relevant relationships in the loops. The model is meant to contain all of the relevant relationships, but it's difficult at times to know just what's relevant. So you put things in and you take them out. When you take things out, you don't want to throw them away. You want to stick them down in the corner someplace and put a note on them as to why you took it out. Because later on, somebody's going to say, did you consider this? Did you consider this? And you're not going to remember all the things that you did consider and removed for some reason. And if you put them down there with a note on them, you have them. And oftentimes you have to go get them and put them back into the model for some reason that you didn't realize when you took them out. So, as I said, it's trial and learning. These two relationships in this model there are questions on, which is part of the legend. If it has a yellow border, there's a question about it, which means we developed it and we thought that it produced this relationship, and we want to go and investigate with other people, is this relationship actually correct? So the idea then is to send this model to someone else, and in a way that if you send them the presentation, they can walk through the description of each of these elements and read the description and understand it and get to a point where they can comment on and provide further understanding of these relationships as to whether or not they're correct. I prefer to do voiceovers and create videos so that people can focus on the relationship model itself as opposed to trying to look at part of the model and read something on the left-hand side as I'm talking about it, or simply look at it and read and try to bounce back and forth. If you can set up the project in Kumu so that an individual can walk through the sequence quite easily, so that here it says if you want to walk through the story, begin with burden of parenthood, and if you click on it, it will take you to that loop. You can click on this and it will dim everything else and show you that particular piece that you can then go ahead and read about, and when you're finished reading about this, you can go to the next piece. You can mouse over this, it will show you that piece highlighted, and you can read about that set of relationships, and you can do this all the way through the model. If you haven't been following the two previous posts that I did on Relationships 101 and Implications 101, someplace either in the notes section of this video or wherever else I posted it, there's a link to this context so that you can look at relationships and implications and be aware that this is a context in the midst of the Perspectives project that's currently developing that has a lot more relationships in it, and it will continue to evolve over time. So hope you found this meaningful, and I'll be back in another video in the not too distant future. Take care. Bye.